Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Y'all hang tight. I've got a lot of slides to go through. My MO is kind of like, I'd rather show you the stuff than talk more about it. I'll do some talking too. But anyway, appreciate y'all having me here. Scott, thanks for the invitation. We got a lot to cover. A lot of exciting stuff, lots of partners in the room, primarily wildlife and fisheries and representation, and that's big. I'm glad you guys are here as well. Thanks for the support. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about my background, not much. Scott pretty much covered that, a brief history of who DU is, but I'll skim over that as well. But I really want to focus, Scott wanted me to talk about coastal restoration and what DU does in that regards. Y'all know the issues, and we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the things we're doing. And then use project examples for that, right, to kind of show you what we're doing with a variety of types of projects, recent, past, and ongoing. And also hopefully we'll have time for some questions as well. That's my background. Not going to go through all that stuff, but I did retire from wildlife and fisheries. Started in 1978 as a student working at Rockefeller. And that's the one thing I want to highlight. I was a teenager, and I was living the life. I would go to Rockefeller and stay there for the week, and did that for about 3 summers and into a winter. And I got to work with biologists in the resources and coastal marshes. And that really intrigued me and got me into the career I'm doing. And anyway, and still work with some of those folks as well. So that's kind of neat. So the beginnings of DU, Scott kind of mentioned that. It was, early. It was the Dust Bowl years, really dry. Some of these, really 4 guys were really concerned about waterfowl numbers and said, we got to do something. So they formed DU really to look at the Canadian prairies primarily and focus money there on some of the drought conditions. And these are some of the old pictures. I just thought that was kind of cool from the 30s, some of the engineering and even some of the ladies involved. Pretty interesting stuff. But what is DU? Well, we're not so much a clothing brand, although we do have that, right? But that's not what we are. And we're a membership of primarily hunters, but our focus is conservation. And I worked with conservation. And 2 of my staff here, Cassidy, you've already been introduced, but Cassidy and Aaron, they're the backbone of our office, so I can't take all the credit for the work we do by any means. These guys are workhorses, and I appreciate all their work. But we do a lot of stuff, and we've really picked up the momentum. And this is our mission statement, right? It's about conservation, conserving resources of wetlands primarily for waterfowl, right? But for all the species that essentially encompasses, and there's lots of them, from fisheries to other birds, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But also people, water quality, storm protection in South Louisiana, helping to restore some of these systems. And we're kind of focused on science, right? We use everything about the latest science and use that toward habitat projects. And we do have policy. We have a policy office in D.C., which is very important for Farm Bill type stuff, other funding, fish and wildlife funding through NAWCA. That's extremely important for the work we do. So I'm going to skim through this really quickly. That was the first project in Canada in 1938. And then I'm going to go through that 50s. It wasn't until the 70s we did a project in Mexico, but still nothing in the U.S. until 1984, North Dakota. And the first project in Louisiana was 1986. And it was on Marsh Island Refuge, owned or managed by Wildlife and Fisheries. And I happened to be there as a young biologist. That's where I started. And it was really neat to see that we're doing that in that short of a time frame. And then we really expanded very quickly. We accelerated conservation extremely quickly, and we're still doing that today. And this is kind of where we are as of now. And we focus primarily on the wintering grounds. Let's see if this pointer's going to work. This stuff here. the breeding grounds, and then the wintering grounds, and then the Central Valley. So we've done so far since we started in '84 over 6 million acres of conservation just in the U.S., and we have 5 level 1 priorities. And if you look, you can see we've got 2 of them in Louisiana, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley and the Gulf Coast, the breeding grounds in the prairies, and then also Central California. But it's pretty impressive that we have 2 of those within the state. We're really the only state that can say that and claim that, and that's important. So we have to focus on the wintering areas for waterfowl. They have to be productive when they go up north to breed. And in order to do that, we have to ensure that they have good habitat, good food resources. And so it's extremely important for lots of birds, primarily ducks, especially these, and if I focus on Louisiana, these species are really important, but lots of species of ducks, but other species as well. So this is kind of from the Canadian prairies, and we look at the Louisiana State Wildlife Action Plan it's a document about species of concern. And there are 88 species of greatest concern that actually utilize those same breeding grounds and same wintering grounds. Through migratory processes or just wintering here. So it's pretty unique, all that these conservation projects do and all the critters that they touch, right? We got to keep that in mind. We think they use a waterfowl, the ducks, duck hunters, we are, but it's about the conservation of, again, a lot of different species. We have 2 field offices in Louisiana, primarily Lafayette. That's our main office for coastal restoration. We also have a very unique partnership with Conocophillips. I'll touch on that a little bit later. They have an office in Houma, and we have a staff person there. They're the largest landowner at 643,000 acres of coastal wetlands, so pretty impressive. We also have private lands work that Aaron kind of heads up, and then we have a rice stewardship program. I won't mention any of that stuff. And then North Louisiana is outside of my area, but we do work on the northern public grounds, some of the primarily state wildlife management areas. And we also do easements within RCS, but we're not going to talk much about that. So our staff includes biologists primarily, and engineers and technicians. We get GIS support. We have an office, regional offices in Jackson, Mississippi, where we have all of our GIS folks there. But that's the bulk of our resources are these guys here, right? And then we have fundraising like Bob Dew does, and Harriet, they're fundraising, some of the grassroots work. And then major donors, of course, are a big part of that, of funding some of what we do, right? So the issues, coastal restoration, why are we even concerned about that? I think most of you know we're losing lots of coastal marsh, right, in Louisiana. Southeast especially is very vulnerable. We have sea level rise, but we have all these other factors that were already in play. Subsidence, saltwater intrusion, storms exacerbate some of our issues, et cetera, right? Mississippi River levee, all that flooding that happens in the spring is contained, dumps off the continental shelf into the Gulf. So we're combating that primarily through this 2017 master plan by CPRA, right? That's a $50 billion plan. A lot of that money is restore money from the BP spill, but other funding as well. QIPRA or the BRO Act, that funding is now focused on master plan projects. And then we come in and we're doing stuff a little bit smaller, but with different funding resources. But we all act and work together with some of these same partners, so important to kind of remember. These are the primary types of work that we do on the coast for coastal restoration. I'll talk a little bit about examples of these things, and we'll kind of run through them fairly quickly, but I'll give you some ideas of some projects that we do. Funding sources, again, lots of funding sources and partners. NAWCA is a big one. That's one I'll talk a little bit more about. Of course, our partners with Wildlife and Fisheries, they own about 500,000 acres of coastal wetlands, so it's important to have them as a partner as well, and they help cost share. We have a lot of federal agencies. CPRA provides a lot of in-kind match for some of our proposals, and lots of other mechanisms, NIFWIF through some of the restore money, I'm not going to go into all these acronyms. It's a little bit too much. But anyway, and I will say, I'll stop at that and say, if you have any questions ever and you want to contact us, we're in Lafayette, feel free to contact us. We'd all be glad to talk to you and give you a little more info. So NAWCA, I talked about NAWCA, and I will explain that because it's administered by Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're a big player in NAWCA. Essentially, it's the same, much like our mission statement, right? This is about conserving wetland ecosystems and all the critters that depend on that. Waterfowl especially, but all the other things that depend on it. So, and it's funding through the federal government. Let's see, I'm trying to think of how that's funded. Appropriations is what it is every year, similar to Farm Bill type stuff. So we, as DU, we're a big player in that, and we get about 50% every year of the entire awards for NAWCA throughout the country. So that's big, that is our game, and we can do that because we can front all of the money up front that needs to be done in terms of staff time to write these proposals. And it's very competitive and it's very tough, but it's a pretty cool system. And anyway, that's our biggest one. So I'll look at some of these projects that were funded by NAWCA and just the types of projects they are. Lost Lake is not a NAWCA-funded project, but we'll talk about that. Most of these that I just mentioned are in southeast Louisiana, and these are all terrace projects here and the marsh creation project. Some of the worst areas of marsh loss here, one down on the lower Mississippi River, and then I'll talk about this guy up here as well. So terraces, I don't know if any of you or some of you probably are familiar with terraces. It's a tool we use that we can actually afford to do through NAWCA. We get about $1 million max through a NAWCA proposal, and we can do good terrace projects with this funding. These are some of the projects. This is what it looks like. A lot of our coastal marshes are big open water, degraded marsh, right? That's becoming big open water. And you come in here and you put terraces in there, and that reduces that wave energy, clarifies the water, and then it gets you to where you can start producing submerged aquatic vegetation. And I'll talk about that a little bit. This is a different view of terraces recently built. You can see big open water. The problem, as you're coming back toward more of the mainland, this is protecting that from even more erosion, right? And enhancing that quality of habitat. And these are the SAVs, again, submerged aquatic vegetation, that you can grow in here very well in these types of projects. And why do we do that? Well, they're a big benefit to fisheries, for one. Extremely good for other critters, lots of birds, ducks, etc. And also protect, really, communities. This is a Pointe-au-Chien marina, lower Pointe-au-Chien, and you can see, what's left of that is just really in poor shape. All of this was marsh, became open water, and now we've got terrace projects in here trying to protect that. So that's storm protection as well, water quality, all of these good things that we can do through as a result of these projects as well, not just for the habitat, for people as well. So Bayou Monet, this is another terrace project, and this is another example of protection. This is protecting one of the flood levees. This is around Refuge Parish. And we also have, I got to throw in this, volunteer opportunities. Many of you probably heard of the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. They're housed here in Baton Rouge. Cassidy headed up this project with them to do some vegetative plantings on one of our projects. But they're always looking for volunteers for doing coastal restoration planting type things. So it's kind of a cool deal that we work with them some. So that's available. You can find them online if interested. So another type of restoration is essentially freshwater and sediment delivery. This is South Pass of the Mississippi River. So head of passes is up here. This is on Passaloo Wildlife Management Area. Crevasses are simply poking holes into a levee to get an area that's degraded, open water, right? That marsh has died back, settled down, subsided. We poked that hole to get that water in there, and this was in 2005. And then today, this is what it looks like, right? Pretty inexpensive project, and it really works. It's quite impressive. And this is a ground shot from it, looking at it. Submerged aquatic, emergent plants as well, lots of duck use, lots of other bird use. This is Avocets and Ibis. This is another similar project, but this was an existing crevasse that we cleaned out on wildlife and fisheries property. And they were partnered in that and then made a bird island with that material out in the middle of open water for nesting colonial seabirds. Another really cool project. This was an acquisition. I kind of threw that in there. It's not really a restoration, but it is protecting property, right, in perpetuity. This was a NACA project that we submitted almost 800 acres to add to Salvador WMA just south of New Orleans for public use, hunting, fishing, whatever. So really cool. Another type of NACA funding project. So Conocophillips is a unique partnership. We've had it since about 2012. They give us about $1 million a year to do work on their property to match that with federal money like NACA projects. So it's a really great system. It works very well. This was a shoreline protection with these wave attenuation devices, these things. We call them WADs. They're big, hollow concrete structures that allow water and sediment to go through them. So they deflect wave energy and hopefully protect the shoreline is the main goal. But in this case, you can see in just a very short time, we started reclaiming land that was lost. That was lake water bottom. So this is Lost Lake's a huge lake over in Terrebonne Parish. And that was just something that they paid for and wanted to do. And this kind of gives you a real cool shot. You can see the wave energy from the lake being dissipated here. And then after some time, that water clarifies and you get these submerged aquatic vegetation beds. And then we also do some of the policy work, right, that I mentioned. Not a big thing for biologists, trust me, going to DC, but you know, sometimes we just have to do what we have to do, I guess. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge. This is a state-run refuge by Wildlife and Fisheries over in Southwest. I just want to mention it because it's so important. We've done a lot of projects, about 6 projects. I think it was 16,000 acres of conservation work. But it was established, one of the first refuges established in South Louisiana. Started out at 86,000 acres, and now it's down to about 71,000 acres. And much of that is because it has a 26.5-mile Gulf shoreline, so all that coastal erosion since 1919 is really, we've lost a lot of land out into the Gulf. They are doing work now, which is a larger scale projects than we can help with, but they're doing some restoration projects on that shoreline to stop that erosion. So anyway, I'll mention a project on Rockefeller that we just finished here this past year. Unit 4, this is a big water control structure, the most popular water control structure for fishing and crabbing. It's close to the Gulf, 5,000 acre plus unit, and then we built fishing piers on it. This was another unique thing that we're starting to do more with other funding. NACA will not pay for fishing piers, but we can do that through other funding like CCA and others. And that's kind of the finished product. And of course, you can see the bird use in the unit is very high. And then there's some of the public use with crabbing and cast netting for shrimp and fishing and whatever. So very popular, but it's a water control structure, mainly for salinity. You're trying to keep salinities out and keep those fresher systems for higher diversity. So a couple of some of the recent projects we just have finished up on. This is Conocophillips, just a water control structure over in Terrebonne. This is Cameron Prairie Terraces over in Southwest. This was part of a Cameron Prairie National Wildlife Refuge and the school board property, partners with the Gravity Drainage District as well. This was a private lands project, water control structure over by Lacassine Refuge in Southwest. And then some of the current and future projects. I'll just whiz through this real quickly. We don't do a lot of marsh creation projects because the cost is so high. Those can be about $90,000 roughly per acre. This one of course, a lot of the acres we're claiming here is for more of nourishment of some of that finer flow. We're only creating about 20 to 30 acres of marsh for almost $3 million. So it kind of gives you the perspective. That's those types of big projects at a larger scale are for CPRA and the master plan. But that's a hydraulic dredge here, and that's how that's pumped in from a source into here. Just fills it in and completely recreates that marsh. And this is an aerial view. These are essentially the dikes that are going to hold that material in, and you can see some of the terraces in the background that I showed earlier from another project. This is Bay Denise over on the Mississippi River, just out of Buras, right across the river from Buras. This is going in and cleaning out some of these channels to get some of that water and sediment into these areas, and building some terraces out here. This is Quarantine Bay, but it's actually the open Gulf. So we're going to see, and we're already seeing that, but we're going to see when we do this, we're going to start this in a couple months, we're going to see marsh creating Gulfward. And that's pretty cool to be able to take those steps and do that at a small scale like we're doing. It's pretty neat. And that should be the results of some of these projects. Some emergent marsh in the back and then submerged aquatic vegetation here. So, an overview and to wrap up. We got a lot going on. I'm not going to read all these numbers, but we are doing a lot of acres of conservation. In a couple years, we're going to be spending about $12.5 million of mostly public revenue. And that's matched. Some of it's donor money from DU, and then we match that with federal money. And then other major donor funding for corporations, et cetera. So lots on the horizon. So you can see some of the other public lands. Marsh Island, we've got another project. Delta Crevasses, that's on Passaloo and on Delta National Wildlife Refuge. So lots going on. We're very busy. I know that was fast and furious, but just wanted to show you the diversity of what we're doing. And if y'all ever have any questions, feel free to call us, any of our staff. Most of our staff can answer any questions you may have, or if you need other types of information, just let us know. And that's all I have. And if we got any questions, time for questions.
Sure. How do these projects fit within the coastal master plan? I mean, are these part of the CPRA master plan, or in addition to it? And also, with respect to the master plan, do the major sediment diversion projects help, or do they sometimes hurt waterfowl?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first off, they're both. Some are in addition, and some actually fall into the master plan footprint. We can do this because we don't have to really fit the guidelines of master plan projects. We try to, because most of the NAWCA projects, for $1 million, we need a $2 million in-kind match. And we get a lot of that from CPRA. So they're typically on board with everything we do, but they're not necessarily right into say a green blob. If you ever looked at the master plan, like a marsh creation blob, they don't necessarily fall into that. As long as they're not inconsistent with the master plan, it's kind of the verbiage they use nowadays. For waterfowl, diversions are excellent for waterfowl. Now, they will impact fisheries, obviously, because you're putting a lot of sediment and freshwater into a system that may be more of a brackish or saltwater estuary, right? So you're changing that dynamic, but you're making it much better for waterfowl. Enhancing those SAVs and building these deltas, that's waterfowl haven. The best example I always like to use is Atchafalaya Delta, Wax Lake Outlet, that was built like in the 40s to relieve flooding from Morgan City. And it was dumped in the Atchafalaya Bay. That was open bay. And in 1972, for the big flood, that delta started building. And if you went out there today, there's probably 30 to 40,000 acres of emergent marsh and aquatic beds. And it's a wildlife mecca. It's really impressive. Now, you don't have oysters there. Because it's too fresh, but all that stuff just kind of moves out, right? It kind of adjusts to the new system, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
You bet. Yep.
Does DU hold any property, any of the land in trust? Do you actually own property, or does DU just mainly fix it up?
DU does. We do not in Louisiana. We will hold easements. Sometimes we'll purchase property like that White acquisition. We have a Watt board that we call, it's the Wetlands America Trust. It's an arm of DU that deals with land acquisition. So we bought the property and then turned it over to Wildlife and Fisheries. So we did technically own it for a little while, and then we just donated it to the state. Now, in other states, like in the breeding grounds in Dakotas, there are some land holdings by DU, yeah. But we don't do that here. We do have easements. We're getting into some of that, but coastal easements are kind of scary because you're looking at perpetuity, and it's like, how do you do that if it's not going to be here for 50 years? So we're struggling with that, and some we don't know where to draw that line kind of thing, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you find that the increase in the commercial farming throughout the flyway, where they're kind of destroying the potholes, is DU involved in conserving some of those potholes for the migration? And secondly, I didn't see the Audubon Society on any of your stuff. Do you work with them also?
We have worked with them on one project where they were a small donor in one of the projects that was part of their refuge, a Paul J. Rainey Refuge. So one of the projects encompassed a little bit of their refuge. But other than that, yeah, apparently they just don't use that many funds for other partnering type work that we do anyway, unless in this case, again, if some of their property was impacted. And the stuff in the prairies on the breeding grounds, which is a lot of that's farmland, most of it is, DU does a lot of work, and a lot of our money from our donors goes up there because that's priority, right? We have to have waterfowl produced to have waterfowl that come down here. And it gets contentious at times, right, for folks. Some people, well, you're spending all that money up north, but you have to, right, if you want to ensure breeding grounds. And that's a tough one. When you get drought years and they start, plowing up these potholes and using tile drains through some of these permanent wetlands and start draining them, it's an issue. And they've got a lot of work cut out for them. We've done that, and that's where we do the acquisition of property or get easements where they're more protected, but it's tough. It's farming's, we trying to work with them and not against them, and that's I don't deal with any of that, thank goodness, but that's a tough one. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike, if money was no object, where do you see in 10 years what you'd like to do in Louisiana?
That's a good question, and we had that before with NIFWIF. We had a meeting a couple years ago, and they asked us that, what would you do if you had $30 more million or whatever? Well, all of us kind of looked at each other, some of the guys I was with, and we said we'd do more of what we're doing. We would just increase that scale, probably get it more into marsh creation, those expensive projects, especially having the partnership with Conocophillips. When you own that much property, and most of it's in Terrebonne and Lafourche, some of the most critical wetland loss areas in the state. We have a lot of opportunity. I would pursue that more, and I'd pursue beneficial use of dredge material with the Corps and their dredging. That's a whole nother subject, and you could do a whole nother talk on that, but a lot of that material is being lost or dumped out into open water that's too deep to build land, and we could be doing more for incremental costs to help them use that beneficially. I hope nobody's from the Corps, but it's not like I'm lying, but they will dump that into an open bay and call that beneficial use. I don't get that, whatever, but it could be used better. Anyway, that's a quick answer, but I got lots of ideas. We could talk for days on that.
I have a quick question over here. So how do you work with private landowners and private duck camps, along the coast and everything?
And that's a good question, and Scott told me keep that out of there, but because you're going to go too long. And Dr. Aaron Pierce is our private lands guy. He runs Louisiana Waterfowl Program, and that's a really neat. We don't advertise that at all, but it's a cost share. We will provide primarily water control structures or help them pay off levee work to make moist soil units primarily. Water control structures to either manage for waterfowl or keep salt water out, or just to manage for moist soil habitat, which is excellent for like shorebirds and not only ducks, but it's really great and really productive. And that's it's a smaller scale. These are typically smaller scale projects, but it's very popular. Without advertising, Aaron's swamped. I mean, people word kind of gets out and the guy owns 50, 100 acres or more. And he's like, man, I'd like to do something. And he'll go out and give them advice, free advice of what he should do. And if they want to partner, if they got a good project, then we partner with them. You're welcome.
How do you
yes.
partner with the Water Institute?
We have met with them and have talked. Our science folks out of our regional office kind of deal with some of that more, with some of the modeling. We are kind of working with them. So we have a terrace evaluation study. Terraces are pretty much anecdotal. There's been some science, some research about terraces. We know they work, right, because you're taking open water and you're putting these things in. You got the edge effect, SAV production for fisheries, for ducks, waterfowl, all that stuff. But we don't have good scientific papers, right, that document that. So we have, there was funding through BP for some of the science, and Mississippi State partnered with DU, our science guys out of our regional office and headquarters, to do a study. So we're in the middle of a study now. And the Water Institute had actually done the same thing, and we ended up getting the proposal. They didn't. But we do, those guys do collaborate some. And I'd like to think that we can do more of that in the future. And maybe we're both interested. We just don't know exactly what our needs are that and how we can help each other, but we're working on that. Good question.
Great.
That's it?
Thank you, Mike.
All right, you bet.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.